How's everyone doing today? Welcome to class. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. It is Tuesday, October 18th. It is 9 a.m. Dr. Roddenberry coming to you live here from Willow Springs, North Carolina. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 9, Motivation and Emotion. So today we're going to introduce you to some basic theories of motivation, talk about why motivation is an important concept in the study of psychology. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk a little bit about emotions. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. There we go. All right, fantastic. So motivation and emotion. Uh, I don't know if you've ever heard of this fellow, seen this fellow, but this guy down here is Alex Honnold. He climbs mountains without ropes for fun. He actually lives in a van. At least he did before they made the movie about him. I'm not sure what his situation is now. But the guy lived in his van and he didn't have a job. All he did was climb mountains and try to get sponsored to do this. And he climbed El Capitan 33,000 feet up without a single rope. Took him about 3.5 hours to do it. Can you imagine? Well, no, actually, can you imagine what in the world would possess somebody to do something like this? I see we have a couple of people in the audience. Why would somebody climb mountains for no particular reason and not only do it, but do it the most dangerous way? What do you think's going on with this fellow, Alex Honnold? Hmm? Can you imagine? If anybody's out there, I see we have 3 viewers now. Why would somebody grow up doing this? The challenge, you say, Angelina. So he just wanted to do something really, really hard. Do you think do you think many people have his sense of challenge? Do you think he's unique? Or do you think we all have some area that we are as motivated as, you know what I mean? Does everybody have a mountain that they climb, or is there something different about Alex, would you say? My coffee is good today. By the way, I want to thank all 3 of you for coming to class today. All right. Well, if you do have a reason, do you think he's if you uh, think he's different, or that we all have some sort of challenge that we climb mountains for? You can type that in the chat, Barbara. We'll go on. But today, what we're going to be talking about is motivation. Uh, what is it that causes people to do the things they do? Now, motivation is actually built into the system. It's the difference between humans and computers. Humans do not, computers do not have a sense of agency. Human beings do. What exactly do you mean by agency? That's a quality of being goal driven. An agency with quality evaluates options, selects an option, performs a behavior, monitors their behavior in the pursuit of picking some sort of goal or end state. Your computer has no sense of agency. Your computer will sit there on your desk quietly waiting as long as it takes before you tell your computer what to do. On the other hand, human beings have a sense of agency. Each and every one of us is up every day trying to accomplish some goal. Either you're trying to get your degree, or you're trying to make enough money to eat, or you're trying to find that loved one, or maybe you're trying to get that promotion. Each and every one of us wakes up with a motivated state, a goal each and every day. It is built into the system. And we're going to talk about it on several different levels today, from biological goals all the way up to Alex Honnold's metaphysical goals. We're going to talk about the way our system monitors and pursues goals, okay? But I just want you to appreciate the difference, the main difference between human beings and computers is human beings have a sense of agency. What exactly do we mean by being motivated? What is the motivating property of agency? Well, a motivation, which is born out of a sense of agency, activates your behavior. It gets you to start a behavior. It directs that energy that you have. I read books. Some people decided to shoot basketballs. Other people decided to sell newspapers, right? So it guides our activity. So your motivation instigates an activity and it selects from a plethora of possible activities, right? Motivation sustains your behavior through that activity because not every activity pays reinforcements instantaneously. And motivations differ in strength. I feel very strongly about teaching students psychology. I am very, very motivated to do that. I'm also learning Spanish, but I'm not nearly as motivated to learn Spanish as I am to teach psychology to students. So I do more work teaching than I do learning Spanish, okay? So you can think of motivations that we feel that come from inside. You can think of those as being activating. They get you started, they pick a direction, they sustain your activity until you get the reinforcement you desire. And motivations can differ in strength. Some people can really feel them strongly. Some motivations you don't feel as strongly. Okay. Now, one big differentiation that I want to talk about at the beginning is motivations can actually be what we call extrinsic or extrinsic. Now, if you'll remember in chapter 6, when we talked about behaviorism, I talked about shaping behavior, okay, using reinforcements and punishments. Do you remember when we talked about positive reinforcements and negative reinforcements? Okay, that was a theory based on extrinsic motivation. According to the behaviorists, every behavior that an animal engages in is because that animal wants a reward of some sort. So your dog sits so it can get the treat. You go to school so you can get the A. Those extrinsic motivation is motivation that we draw from outside our bodies based on the rewards that we get from outside of ourselves, right? So if you go to work for a paycheck, that's an extrinsic motivator. If you take this class because you're trying to get into a four-year school, that's an extrinsic motivator. You know what? Most of the students that come to my Wednesday webinars don't do it because they love psychology. They do it for the extra credit. That's why I offer the extra credit. These are all examples of extrinsic motivators, okay? And we'll differentiate those from those things that come from within. So some people paint or they run or they play basketball because they really, really love it, because they would tell you it's fun. I get enjoyment out of it. I get personal satisfaction out of it. If you do something because it makes you feel good on the inside, we would call that an extrinsic motivator. Okay, so I teach I teach because I get paid, right? So I do that as an extrinsic motivator. But I do my online classes and my webinars because I really love talking to and interacting with students. So that's an intrinsic motivator. So I teach for the paycheck. That's an extrinsic motivation. On the other hand, I do all my social interaction and my online stuff because I really find it fun. I love that. That's an intrinsic motivation. Okay, so You can think of motivation and agency as a uniquely human or animal quality. Animals have motivations and a sense of agency too. But it's the thing that separates living organisms like us from computers. It's that agency, that sense of motivation that causes you to pick activities and pick from among activities. You can think about it having different qualities. Each motivation that you have has 4 different qualities. And you can think about motivations as being something that either come from the inside or come from the rewards that we get. All right. And so that's what sort of makes you uniquely an organism, if you will. Now, what I'm going to do today is talk about motivation in 4 different contexts. As you see at the bottom, the blue line down here, motivation has been studied in the context of many different areas of psychology. And at the end of this lecture, I have a chart that's going to summarize these different areas. And the chart should be in your textbook too. Now, one of the ways in which our human beings are motivated is to maintain homeostasis. And you can actually think of this in terms of basic biological processes. You, the organism, need air to breathe. If you're not getting enough air, your body will tell you that you need oxygen, and you will be motivated to find some air to breathe. If you are thirsty and you are parched and you're becoming dehydrated, your body will tell you that you are thirsty and motivate you to seek water. If you haven't had any calories in a long time, your body will tell you that you are hungry and motivate you to seek out food. All of these, in a sense, are forms of motivation, and this is controlled by your nervous system, right? And so these are what we would call drive reduction motivations. So you have a certain balance state, a certain homeostasis that you want. And anytime it gets out of balance, you are driven to reduce that imbalance, to put that system back in homeostasis. Does that make sense? So a drive is a biological, psychological state of imbalance that initiates a biological or behavioral process designed to reestablish homeostasis. All right, this is a theory of intrinsic motivation, and it explains drives that arise from within. Now, the most important part of your brain for drive reduction and in the maintenance of drive reduction states is going to be your hypothalamus. When we talked about it in chapter 2, I talked about it as the seat of motivated behavior. I said motivated behavior, and then we just moved on. What did I mean by motivated behavior? It maintains homeostasis of the system. It tells you when you're hungry. It tells you when you're thirsty. It tells you when you're horny. It tells you when you're cold or warm. Your hypothalamus helps you maintain yourself in a balanced state that you prefer to be in. And so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about how your hypothalamus manages your body temperature. Okay, so the ventromedial hypothalamus leads to damage to that, leads to overeating because that maintains your eating, but damage to the preorbital area, which is in the front of it, can lead to difficulties regulating your body temperature. So this little structure has different areas that regulate sex and eating and temperature. Now, warm-blooded animals have evolved the ability to control their own body temperature. Systems inside the body, inside your body, require that body temperature remain within a restricted range. You have this thing called a core body temperature, and your core body temperature needs to stay within a very narrow range in order for you to live. If it gets out of this range, your body will become damaged, it won't function, and you'll die. So your body is designed to keep your core temperature within this restricted range. Your hypothalamus defends this range by initiating biological and behavioral responses to body temperatures outside of the acceptable range. Now, if you'll remember in chapter 5, when I was talking about sensation and perception, we talked about mechanoreceptors and thermoreceptors in your body. We were talking about sensation and perception. If you'll remember, I talked about vision, I talked about hearing, I talked about the sense of olfaction, and I suggested to you that your body has these other receptors that are spread over. I said most of your senses are located in one part of your body, typically around your head, but your sense of touch and heat and pressure goes all over your body, and you have these receptors all over your body. Well, you have these receptors on your skin and attached to your viscera called thermoreceptors. And these thermoreceptors simply gather information from your internal organs and from your skin and relay that information to your hypothalamus. And that information is acted upon by your hypothalamus to keep you in a restricted range. Now, here's the thing. Your skin temperature may fluctuate if you walk outside on a really cold day, and your skin temperature may drop quite a few degrees. Now, your internal body core temperature is not going to drop that quickly. Okay, that's the part of you that when that starts to drop, you are in big danger. But the drop in temperature on your skin is used as readout by your hypothalamus, and it wants to keep your core temperature from going into that dangerous range. So even before your core temperature starts sending these cold signals to your hypothalamus, your skin temperature is sending information to your hypothalamus that it's interpreting as cold or hot. Okay, now these thermoreceptors in your skin measure your skin temperature, and your hypothalamus creates both biological and behavioral changes in response to body temperature outside of the defended range. Now, the skin temperature allows your body to sense cold conditions or hot conditions before they become a problem to your core body temperature. Okay, and so your skin temperature is sort of the alarm bell that drives this system. Now, what kind of biological responses are driven by your hypothalamus? Well, it causes shivering, okay, and shivering is a motivated behavior, and it's designed to create heat in the core. So that movement creates an increase in temperature. So it's your body burning fat to create heat energy for your body. Now, your body will also shrink and expand the size of your blood vessels throughout your body to control the loss of warmth. Now, it turns out that your blood has a lot of this heat, and this heat is dispersed from your blood vessels. Now, when your blood vessels expand, they get closer to the skin, and the ambient temperature of the skin can siphon off some of the heat. So when your blood vessels dilate, they get the blood closer to the skin, which allows your skin to get closer to the ambient temperature, your blood to get closer to the ambient temperature at the outside, which causes it allows it to release heat out of the system. On the other hand, when you get cold, your blood vessels constrict and get farther away from outside, and it causes you to conserve heat. So vasodilation and vasoconstriction constriction manage the amount of heat that is lost from your skin. And sweat production on the skin provides water, and when air blows over that water, it creates cooling, which also cools off the skin temperature. And so these are the biological changes that are driven by your hypothalamus in response to your your skin temperature getting too high or too low. And it does this proactively so that we can maintain that consistent core body temperature. Now, your hypothalamus is also measuring your internal core temperature as well, and it's trying to keep it from moving at all. Now, human beings, animals, organisms also have behavioral motivations that are sort of baked into the system that are designed to help in this process. So, heat seeking or heat avoidance. If you've ever been out of the campfire on a cold winter night and you move a little bit closer in because it's cold, you notice that the animals, your dog, your cat, does the same thing. So they use heat seeking and heat avoidance uh, 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 um, as the same way. So on a hot day, you'll find the shade because it's a little bit cooler. The same as the animal. It will walk around until it finds the place that is cooler, which is usually underneath the shade. Huddling together, tunneling, burrowing, nesting, laying on the ground, huddling up like that. These are all motivated behaviors designed to warm up the human being or the organism. And then we have complex human behaviors. We put on extra jackets, we put on mittens, we put on hats. Those are complex behaviors that involve social artifacts, but the motivation is still the same. And so what you're going to see is that that organisms have this hypothalamus, which causes behavioral and biological changes in the body based upon heat feedback from the skin and from the internal organs. And the idea of this motivation system is to keep you in a state of homeostasis. Now, we have the same thing for hunger, you have the same thing for thirst, you have the same thing deep down in your medulla for your oxygen level. It measures the level of oxygen in your blood, and when it gets too low, it motivates you to take a big gulp of air. And this is what is implicated in sleep apnea. People have blockages that cause them not to get enough air down their throat at night, and they snore. When they snore and make loud noises, they're actually waking up and gulping in air based on this drive reduction system. And so when they wake up in the morning, they think that they just slept poorly, but what they did was they got up hundreds of times a night as their body shook them awake to gasp for air. So these are what we would call biological drive reduction states of motivated behavior. Now, how many of you have ever been bored before? How many of you have ever been bored before? Don't you hate being bored? How many of you have ever been terrified before or been so nervous about an exam or a test or something, a medical procedure that you couldn't think straight, right? So if you've ever been bored, yeah, right? Funny. Have you ever had been overwhelmed by the moment, Angelina, and been in a situation where you were so uptight and nervous that you couldn't think straight? Have you ever had that experience? So definitely you've been bored. Now, it turns out that human beings like to find a sweet spot somewhere between being freaked out and being bored. We'll call that sweet spot the level of optimal arousal. It's where you function best. And optimal arousal has been used as a theory of motivation in sports psychology. So you're going to see optimal arousal. Now, here's the deal. Sometimes Well, in order for you to perform at your best, you really need to care about what you're doing. You really need to have a certain level of interest in that activity. On the other hand, you also don't need to be so nervous about your performance that it impairs your ability to perform. And so, what sports psychologists know is that human beings have a desired level of arousal that they try to maintain. And what sports psychologists do, most of the time, they deal with people who are on the high end of the anxiety spectrum because they're performing in front of thousands or millions of people. They're performing on TV. So there are high degrees of arousal. And what sports psychologists know how to do is to teach these people strategies for reducing their arousal back down to an optimal level. Now, what you'll see below me is a curve that talks about the difference between performance and arousal. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson law. Now, if you look on the y-axis, you'll notice that we have performance quality. So scoring a 0 on your psych exam to scoring 100 on your psych exam. Winning 50th place at the cheerleading competition versus winning first at the cheerleading competition, right? And then if you look along the y-axis, we have what you would call arousal level. And what you're going to find is that people's performance has this unimodal relationship with arousal, in which most people, if they have too little arousal, they don't perform well. If they get an optimal level of arousal, they perform perfectly. But if they get too much arousal, it starts to impair their performance. So everybody has this optimal level of arousal. And the idea is to get yourself into that optimal level of arousal. So my problem sometimes in psychology is I have 18-year-old students that don't really care about school and don't really care about psychology. So they are on the other end of the spectrum. Why don't they come to class? Why don't they do their homework? Why don't they do better on their assignments? It's because they don't have enough arousal, right? And so what you're going to find is that this is used in sports psychology to help manage people's level of arousal and find out where it's optimal for that person. And if you'll notice that we have what you're going to notice here is two things. The first is that there are individual differences. And the second is, if you look at this chart underneath right here, what they're going to suggest to you is that it also depends upon how complex the task is. So one of the things that sports psychologists know is that if you're doing something that involves a really simple movement, really simple activity like running fast, running a race, or let's say football, tackling two people, more arousal is better. As opposed to if you're playing golf, where you're using very fine motor movements and the task is very complex and difficult, actually it's better to be less anxious. And so what you're going to notice is that the level of excitement and energy that you're going to see will differ depending upon the sport and the level of complexity that is involved in performing that sport. The second thing is it has been used in terms of looking at people's personality. If you'll notice, there are some people in the world who are introverted. They don't like arousal. And there are some people who seem to really like to be around other people and be around, around other people and be in social situations and being engaged. Some of you are introverts and some of you are extroverts. Some people seek out stimulation and some people avoid stimulation. And so optimal arousal has actually been used to explain biologically why people have different personality styles. Now, we're going to talk about this in a little more in depth when we get to chapter 13, which is the personality chapter. But we all have this system in our brainstem called the reticular activating system that is the part of our brain that monitors and manages our level of arousal. Some people have a real sensitive reticular activating system, and so they don't need much stimulation for their RAS to light up. Other people may have this reticular activating system that is not sensitive at all, and it takes more stimulation in order for this brain area to activate. So there are some people who argue that if you look at the difference between introverts and extroverts, what you're going to notice is that it's a difference for in preference for level of arousal. So an introvert it's easier to stimulate them into optimal arousal, and for an extrovert, it's harder to stimulate them into an optimal level of arousal. Now, I'll take that one step even further. For those of you who are interested, this has actually been implicated in antisocial personality disorder. And there are some doctors who believe that they can identify people who are going to grow up to be sociopaths based on levels of brain activity that can be identified early in childhood. So these people think that there are some brains that are dangerous and that you can identify these brains as early as the age 4. If you're interested in that, I'm typing it, dangerous minds. There's a video. There's a video on YouTube. It's about 45 minutes long. And basically, what they say is that sociopaths are people that have a broken arousal system. And so the things that would terrify you and me, like robbing a bank, stealing from people, dealing drugs, those things that we are so afraid of that would just make us melt, are the kinds of things that they need in order to actually engage their brains. And so the idea is that sociopaths have this broken optimal arousal system, and they actually need the stimulation of doing really, really bad things in order to achieve an optimal level of arousal. It's a really bizarro video, and I think you might find it interesting. Now, okay, so those are sort of two that really make decent biological sense to me. This drive reduction and this optimal level of arousal. They sort of relate to brain areas of the brain. We can talk about how these help us manage our behavior. They can account for personality differences. I want to take you back a few minutes because your book talks about it, to the golden age of psychology, the early 1900s, and a fellow named Sigmund Freud. Okay, now Sigmund Freud had a different take on human motivation. You can actually say that his was the first theory of human motivation. I put it third instead of first. Because I think there's less scientific evidence for this particular theory. I wanted to start with the first two that were more science and biological based. But Sigmund Freud argued that human beings have these biologically predisposed needs, if you will. Think about a need as an instinct for an animal that can think about instincts. Okay, so we all have the instinct for sexual activity. It's built into the animalistic system, right? We all have that instinct. If animals didn't have that instinct, they wouldn't procreate and have more animals. So it's built into the system. It's an instinct. Now, you and I can talk about that instinct and think about that instinct and intellectualize that instinct. So, what we do is instead of calling it an instinct, we call it a need, if you will. Okay? Does that make sense? Do you see how I'm trying to? What a need is it's an instinct that we cloak in psychological garb. Okay, right. So a need is a psychological state of deficit that initiates a behavior. They don't have a point of homeostasis. Instead, they provide a constant source of motivation that drives the individual. So, in a sense, you can think of this instinctual need as being built into the system, something we talk about. Now, Sigmund Freud built his theory on the idea that human personality is shaped by the way your need interacts with the rules of society. Okay? So, Sigmund Freud thought that sex was the most important instinct that drove the animal. If you think about it, outside of eating, drinking, and avoiding getting killed, procreating and passing your genes on is one of these primary human activities, primary or animal activities. It's a primary activity. Now, he argued that because you can drink whenever you want, you can eat whenever you want, right? You can do lots of these other motivated behaviors. You can breathe air whenever you want. Nobody cares. And so these things don't really become psychologically important. But Freud argued that sex, on the other hand, is governed by rules. So, unlike all of the other instinctual needs we have, Sigmund Freud argued that the need for sex, the instinct for sex, is highly controlled by society. And so he argued that the conflict between this instinct, our need to fulfill this instinct, in society's rules creates a lot of conflict. And he argues that managing this conflict is what creates human personalities. And he argued that all human personality is driven, in a sense, by a need for sexual gratification. He called this the pleasure principle. And he argued that people, in a sense, develop their personalities in such a way that they can fulfill this need while avoiding getting in trouble. Okay? Now, why is Sigmund Freud important? He's important because his was the first theory of human development. He was the first person to explain how personality developed. So you can actually think of him as a developmental psychologist. He was one of the first clinical psychologists that looked at psychological disorders. Okay, right? And so he was also the first really, really famous psychologist. And so, in a sense, his theory really gained an outsized importance in the field of psychology. And so, it's important that we sort of appreciate this Freudian theory. So, he argued that people have this sexual desire, and it conflicts with the world, and this motivates all of our behavior. Now, Freud also argued that sometimes when people are driven to distraction by this drive, by this need, or by the guilt that this need causes, okay, they develop strategies for managing the feelings of anxiety that come along with this guilt. And he identified these things as what he called defense mechanisms. Have you ever heard sometimes they argue that people who act really homophobic in public are actually maybe afraid of their own homosexual feelings? Have any of you ever heard that theory before? Have you ever heard anybody say that theory? that people who are really homophobic are actually just afraid of their own sexual impulses. Okay, if you've ever heard that, Angelina, that is a Freudian defense mechanism that they're talking about. Yes, yes, yes. Actually, well, they would call it reaction formation, which is turning yourself into the exact opposite motivation. I feel that I have this sexual desire and it's wrong and it makes me very ashamed. So, what I do is I turn it into the exact opposite and I get angry at another person. Angelina points out another one. Have you ever had somebody accuse you, a romantic partner accuse you of cheating, and then it turned out that that romantic partner was cheating? Uh, Freud would argue that they were driven by the guilt of their desire, and they projected that guilt onto you and accused you of the behavior. But yes, Angelina, projection, reaction formation, these are all ways of managing sexual guilt according to Sigmund Freud. Okay, and so according to some theories of motivation, human beings desire a certain something and they just can't get enough of it. According to Freud, that something that never went away was the desire for sex. Alfred Adler, on the other hand, he was sort of a colleague of Freud, but he disagreed with the primary motivation. He thought that, you know what, people weren't really driven by sex. Instead, people were driven by their need for superiority. He argued all human beings come into the world very inferior. You're a helpless baby. And he argued that we're all really terrified and scared because we are so inferior. And so he argues that our whole entire life is driven towards feeling powerful about ourselves, to feel a sense of self efficacy, to feel like we can get something done. I can get that job. I can find love. I am a smart person. I can do my job. Okay, these are all feelings of powerful and of power and superiority. Have you ever heard the term inferiority complex? Oh my God, you have an inferiority complex. Uh, Alfred Adler argued that some people don't fulfill this need for power, and these people sometimes either their parents treat them really meanly and tell them everything they do is terrible, or sometimes their parents pamper them and take care of everything, and the person doesn't learn to do anything on their own. And he argues these people may develop what he called an inferiority complex. And if you've ever made the joke about the guy with the fancy car by saying, oh, look at that guy with the really expensive car, he's making up for something that's really small. He's overcompensating. If you've ever used the word overcompensating or thought about that, that is an Adlerian concept that goes along with inferiority. He argues that sometimes people feel so inferior about themselves that they find one good thing and then they accentuate that to make themselves feel powerful. All right. And then Karen Horney, she disagreed with Alfred Adler and Sigmund Freud. She just said people aren't motivated their whole life by sex. They aren't motivated their whole life by power. What people are instead motivated by is a need to feel security, to feel love. They need to feel wanted. Okay. And so Karen Horney said it's not sex, it's not power, it's security. And she argued that people are overwhelmed by their inability to achieve security in social relationships. And sometimes, if they are, they may become a codependent person. A codependent person is somebody that needs help making every life decision. They can't live without somebody else's opinion. They need help going to the store. They need help choosing a major. They need help getting a job. They need help with relationships. They need another person's help. Some people are codependent, and then some people are, if you will, defiant and loners, and they respond to their inability to achieve security by pretending that they don't need anybody. And so all of these three people suggested that human beings are driven by different motivations. You know, there's actually even some research into what we call need for achievement, and this I kind of believe in. You know, some of you students absolutely have to get an A in my class and have to get an A in every class and have to be in first place and have to win the contest. You have a high need for achievement. Some people don't care about contests. Some people don't really care about their grades or their GPA. These people are low in need for achievement. When we get to chapter 13, I'm actually going to give you a test to measure need for achievement as a personality style. And one of the things that I find as an academic, as a professor, is that there is definitely a difference in people's need to be to achieve in an academic or an evaluative setting. Angelina, I'll bet you're probably a high need for achievement person. You're in class, you're in the webinar getting the extra credit. I'll bet you are the kind of person who really needs to make good grades. Ha! Easy to tell. You're engaged. You're doing the extra credit, all of that stuff. You know what? We're going to talk about projective personality tests. Sometimes you can ask somebody, that's called a self-report personality test. Other times you can just give a person a situation, see how they behave, and guess their personality. So what I did just there was I used a projective personality evaluation. I gave you a bunch of situations. I see how you act in them, and then I can guess your personality, right? Okay. Now, how many of you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Anybody heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? We have a couple of people out there. Angelina, have you heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Yes, you have. Okay, cool. Now, what you may not have heard is put his theory in the context of these other needs-based theories. These were what we would call the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic psychologists. Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, Karen Horney, and they were doing therapy on people, and they thought that people were driven by needs. And each of these psychologists had their own need that they thought human beings were driven by. And they had their own case studies where they could prove how important their need was and how that was the most important need for understanding human personality. This guy, Abraham Maslow, came upon the insight that, you know what, there are different needs that people have. And depending upon their situation, people are driven by different needs. So you can think about Abraham Maslow as the adult in the room saying, Freud, Adler, Horney, you're all correct in a certain way. And so he argued that human beings, human motivation can be understood as changing based upon circumstances. And the sort of the important dimension that he looked at was how well you are doing in terms of surviving. And so he has this triangle right here where he talks about needs. The need that drives a human being changes based upon what other needs they have fulfilled. And he argues some needs are preeminent, are more important than are others, right? So you may need to feel respected, but if you're hungry and haven't eaten in 5 days, you don't care about respect. Instead, you're driven by hunger, right? We all would like to achieve, to write that novel, to do the thing that really caps our life. But on the other hand, we're more interested in being safe from being robbed, right? So depending upon what needs you fulfilled, other needs are less important. All right. And so Maslow has this hierarchy of needs where he argues that your personality is directed and created by needs deficits. When you haven't fulfilled a need, it is the thing that drives your personality. And he sort of differentiated between what he called deficit needs, okay, and B needs, being needs. Now he argued that all of these deficit needs are needs that should be fulfilled but not focused on exclusively. If they did, they could become problematic aspects of personality. For example, if you look down here at the bottom, physiological needs are the most important: food, water, warmth, oxygen, and sleep. So food is an important need to fulfill. We have to eat. Now, he argues that that's a deficit need. Once you eat enough, then you should move on to the next need. But some people get focused on that aspect of need. They focus on this D need. And he argues that this can lead to a personality problem, right? Now, so he argues that the things that drive people first are the physiological needs: food, water, warmth. He said once people fulfill those needs, what you're going to find is that most people are driven by security needs: safety, protection, freedom from threats and harm, right? So first we have to eat, and then we have to feel safe, right? And then he argues a more important need than that is acceptance and love, right? We need people to accept us and bring us into the group. And then he argues once we have that, we want to feel good about ourselves and have the group feel good about us. That's what he would call the esteem needs. And so he argues that when you look at different people in the world and you say, hey, what really drives that person? And it depends on what that person is missing and what they need. Now, he argues that all of these other needs, self-esteem, belonging, safety, physiological, they're D needs. They're what we need enough of. But if we focus on those exclusively, if you focus on nothing but having people think well of you on your esteem needs, then you become one of those butt-kissing power mongers, right? If you're the person that focuses on nothing but love, and you become sort of one of those codependent persons that can't function without another human being. He argues that you can focus on any of these D needs too much. He argues that the true healthy personality of someone who has fulfilled all of these D needs is that they move on to what he would call the need for self-actualization, a B need. And he argued that B needs can never be fulfilled too much. There's never too much of a B need that it will make you sick or twist your personality. And this is the need to fulfill your potentials and achieve your personal aspirations, right? So for a college professor who's paid his bills off and has saved money and the kids are grown up, I have this need to travel. And so that's my goal in life, going to different places. And I just can't get enough of this travel, right? Now, on the other hand, you may be an 18-year-old student that's trying to get a job so that you can earn enough money to feed yourself and have an apartment. So traveling the world, climbing mountains, that's not going to be your focus because you have other needs to fulfill. But the idea behind Maslow's hierarchy of needs was he saw the limitations in the psychoanalysis idea of what drives human beings. And this asks the question, what drives human beings? Is it sex? Is it a need for power? Is it a need for love? Or is it, as Maslow says, dependent upon what needs you have already fulfilled? Now, if you'll look, oh no, 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 doggone it. Oh well, I don't have that slide, but it's actually on the slide that's in your notes. It's a big green slide, and basically it provides you an overview of these 4 theories of motivation. So, again, the highlight from today's lecture, I want you to know that one of the things that differentiates organisms from computers is organisms, and specifically we talk about humans, we have a sense of agency. We have a sense of motivated behavior. We pick goals, we sustain our activity towards achieving those goals, we evaluate our progress on the way to these goals. And so you can think of motivation as an important part of emotional of human functioning, along with thinking, right? So we think, but all of that thinking is driven by a sense of goal awareness. We are thinking, our memories, our frontal lobe, our vision, all of these abilities are organized behind the idea of achieving some sort of goal. And that's sort of one important aspect of human beings is understanding the nature of goal-directed behavior. All right, that's all I have to say. I want to thank you for coming today. Thank you very much, Angelina. As always, you participate in class. You come to my extra credit stuff. Wonder why I know you're a need for achievement kind of person, because you're a great student. That's what it is. Now, don't forget, we do have the bi-weekly webinar this Wednesday night. We'll be talking about motivation and emotion. I might do my lying lecture. I'm not sure. But we're going to do something interesting on Wednesday night at 7 p.m. So I hope to see you, Angelina, and anybody else that watches this video and recording later today or tomorrow morning. You are also invited to come to our webinar Wednesday night. Hey, take care, have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye.